Check 1, 2, 1, 2. One, two, check.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is now 1:00 p.m. and I'll call this meeting to order of the Corporation of Township of Mapleton Council meeting on October 26, 2021. Here in the council chambers. Nice to have the real full council meeting in the council chambers. Back at it again. And that's the plan going forward here, unless we know we're going to have a lot of delegations or a lot of people coming. At this time, before I get any further along, we have in our township some great staff, and the staff are always trying to improve themselves and become better for our community and to work hard. And with that, there is a Master of Planning program at the University of Guelph. And our own Michelle just got accepted to the program. So congratulations, Michelle, for getting accepted into this program of rural planning and development. We look forward to your success in it and what it's going to bring to Mapleton. So congratulations on getting accepted to the program. At this time, we'd like to rise and sing "O Canada." And the good part about that is that we had the mics off and it probably didn't get picked up on the video, so no one will hear my bad singing. Thank you, Mr. Clerk, for having me lead off. I will make you do it next time. Any declaration of pecuniary interest today? Seeing none, thank you. We have confirmation of minutes. Resolution here moved by Councillor Otten, seconded by Councillor Craven, that the minutes of the Township of Mapleton Council meeting held on October 12th, 2021 be confirmed as circulated in the agenda package. Any questions or thoughts on this? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. We had no matters under the Planning Act today. Delegations today, we have Urania from the Wellington County Emergency Management. And Urania is going to update us on Emergency Management Committee structure. Please, Urania. Thank you.
Through you, Your Worship. Thank you very much. Yeah, my report today is on the update to the Township of Mapleton's Emergency Management Committee. So the committee structure was updated on November 22nd, 2016, due to the township's emergency management program being enhanced and to allow for the committee to evolve with the program, as well as due to changes to the organization of the township and support agencies. Through discussion with the Emergency Management Ontario field officer for the Bruce sector, she has advised that some changes were necessary to the listed committee structure from 2016 in order to continue to be in compliance with the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act and the attached regulation 380-04. There's no necessary changes to the specific committee members structure from 2016. There's simply a need to identify a committee member as a committee chair. And that you'll see in the recommendation, we've added the CAO as the committee chair there. And further, there's a requirement for the removal of the or alternate or as designated that was noted beside some of the committee members in 2016, just to make sure we continue to remain in compliance, and that's actually covered already by the note in the recommendation that states, and further other persons or agency representatives that may be appointed by council from time to time. That's the bulk of it. Thank you.
All right, that's quick and dirty. Thank you, Rania. Any questions for Rania on this? Councillor Ottens?
Through you, your worship. I'm not sure if you are the one that answers this, but what is the protocol during an emergency for informing the rest of council that there is an emergency and then keeping council apprised as the situation changes?
Thank you. Through you, your worship. Yeah, so basically the head of council is part of the incident management system structure. So that's the response structure during an emergency, and they are the person that would keep council apprised as to what's going on and update them as needed.
Thank you. So unlike the emergency we've been in for the last while with the COVID, if it was a tornado or a flood, then the information would come to the table. We have those discussions, and that would be fed to the council as we ongoing. Council's not in that conversation with the EOC, but they will be provided that information. Yep. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Rania. I do have a motion here moved by Councillor Craven, second by Councillor Ottens, that the Township of Mapleton Council maintains the 2016 appointments of the Emergency Management Program Committee and removes as an alternate as designated language per member as follows: member of council, mayor, CAO, clerk, public works director, treasurer, chief building official, economic development coordinator, local municipal fire chief, Wellington County OPP, Guelph Wellington EMS, Wellington Dufferin Guelph Public Health, emergency manager CEMC, and further that other persons or agencies representatives that may be appointed by council from time to time, and further that council designate authority to the committee to appoint the CAO as chair on behalf of their members. All those in favor? That's carried. No minutes from committees. We have from reports from staff. We have the CAO Clerk's Department draft of procedural bylaw. And I'm going to turn this over to Clerk Wheeler because you have a lot to say about this, Clerk Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, sir, and councilors, I'm excited to have the first draft of a potential new procedural bylaw here this afternoon. Two councils that I've been involved with, this one and Mayor Driscoll's and Councillor Woodham, the level of courtesy and respect has been such that I believe they could get through a 4-year mandate without a procedural bylaw. But that is not always the case. And I think now maybe is the ideal time to update and modernize Mapleton's. My report is today is divided into 4 divisions. Division A is largely a tidy up exercise and some modernization. Division B is some concepts that I'd like council to debate and make a decision. Division C is some potential additions that are sourced from other municipal bylaws. And Division D is just open-ended with the hope that council may insert or remove things that they've been looking forward to tackling. the resolutions are inclusive, all inclusive, but they're also open-ended. So, for example, the resolution may say that it accepts everything in Division A with the exception of. So just out of respect, I've left them open-ended, and I look forward to discussing the bylaw and any questions you may have.
All right, Clerk Wheeler, were you finished, sir? All right. So Council, Clerk Wheeler provided us with quite a lot of information when it comes to procedural bylaw, this next draft we have here. And he is looking for some direction on what council would like to do in this draft. Any additions, corrections, deletions, and there are some points here that he wants us to consider. I think it's fair that we go through some of these points one by one as provided, so we have a good discussion on them. I know that alterations in Division A, and before we go through that, in Division A's, there's quite a few in there. A lot of them are just minor alterations. Given, go ahead, Clerk.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor, and they should all be in red.
All right. So is there any comments or questions in Division A that council would like to discuss at this point? There's quite a few in there. Just give you a minute or two to go through. There's, like I said, quite a few. There's the information there about the new council deemed to be organized as well as the changes to the date of inauguration has taken place. Some spots in there where the CAO has been inserted into it. That wasn't there before. Councilor Martin.
Perfect. I like them all, honestly. I think they're all quite timely. Like you said, a lot of them were simply clerical in nature, and then some of the additions I think are all perfectly appropriate.
Thank you, Councilor Martin. Any other comments on Division A? No, don't see any. Okay. So I think the clerk, Mr. Clerk, Division A looks pretty good for us. Now, Division B, we might have some more comments and questions on Division B. We know that I do like B1 there, having that information present as to number of members present, the majority vote and 2/3 vote. That's actually helpful. Makes it very clear for us. I know that I noticed others you provided, other procedural bylaws from other communities, and some of them have that in there. I just want to thank the clerk as well, because he's provided us a lot of information here when it comes to the bylaw. He's got the old one, he's got the drafts here, he's got Center Wellington, Pushledge, Wellington North, Guelph, Massa, Erin, Minto, the county. He's got another procedural bylaw with AMCO at the bottom. And that's a lot of information that you provided with to give us some idea of, you know, what other people are doing and what we might want to do. So with Division B, you have the first one on there of the voting. The table illustrates the required number of votes, majority and versus 2/3. And the council could consider inserting this table in the bylaw. So we'll take that as point. Would council like this inserted into the bylaw? That's yes. And then we come talk to say that circumstances of the procedural bylaw require 2/3 vote to carry. Council wish to discuss those points made by the clerk. Nope, seem to be pretty good. All right. We get down to notice of provision for special council meetings. on B2. Mr. Clerk, you looks like to speak to that one at all?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just can't help but notice a couple of occasions where councils pivoted very quickly with this, when asked to by the CAO in the middle of an afternoon. We've had a special council meeting the next morning, and that's quite quick action. And I believe now with modern technology that we can get a sufficient level of notice out to the public that would allow that 12 hours notice. Not to say that you would do that all the time, but it certainly avails the council to that.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And I notice in some of the communities, they have the 48 hours notice and 24 hours notice. They have a split between a special meeting of council and an emergency meeting of council. So they do have that split as well. Questions on that piece? Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the clerk's points are well taken as far as the ability to push out the notification. I think I'd like it to stay at 24 hours just as a baseline. I think that's, you know, as a working guy who needs a bit of time to be able to figure out scheduling and stuff too. I think there's always the ability in an emergency where we can waive that notice provision. But hopefully that can be very much one-offs, that we don't need to do that. But I think for me, 24 hours is a nice ring to it myself.
And I can understand that, Mr. Martin, especially with people that are working that need that extra space sometimes. And as always, we always try to make sure that all council members can be present at special meetings. So that's why we do the call around. Council Craven?
Yeah, I'd like to stay with 24 hours too. Either that, or could we, instead of going to 24 instead of 12, could we call an emergency meeting? Would that be inserted or not?
So keep it at 24 for any special meeting, and for any emergency,
Yeah, instead of
add
12.
the emergency section in there.
Yeah, where you might use, call a meeting in 12 hours, call an emergency meeting instead, maybe.
Okay, Mr. Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have an additional clause in the bylaw to handle emergencies, state of emergencies, and we'd certainly, this is special to that. So council can, in the case of an emergency, a flood or anything, they can quickly call a meeting. This is just notice for a special meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Councilor Ottens, you want to?
No, I agree with the other two. 12 hours doesn't really seem practical, especially in the circumstance that is laid out here where you discuss it the night before, having a meeting the next morning. I mean, some people wouldn't even know about it until they have to be there, or in case of the public, because an overnight information, giving the information out overnight isn't enough time. So I agree the 24 hours is probably adequate.
Thank you. I think we'll just keep that at the 24 hours then, Mr. Clerk. And then we have B3, workshop. And I think adding that piece of the workshop in there, I notice that other communities do have it. I think it's essential we have one of those, allowing the CEO to call a workshop. So at that workshop, we don't pass any resolutions or bylaws per se. We just do regular meeting notices. Is that correct, Mr. Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's definitely correct. Why some municipalities are doing this is that the educational sessions, which are quite popular, are really part of the closed session legislation. So this is a way of calling a workshop without necessarily going through yet another closed session, and although largely the same thing.
Go ahead, Councilor Ottens.
So regarding that, then, if you call it a workshop, does that still theoretically make it closed to the public, or is it then open on the off chance a member of the public wanted to sit in?
Clerk Wheeler?
It would definitely be open, and if council wished that it not be, then we could go with an educational session in-house in Canberra.
Thank you. Other comments on the workshop? I think it's a good idea. Anybody doesn't think it's a good idea? Add the workshop? All right. B4, member permission to leave a meeting. I never did like, having to put up my hand and feel like I'm back in school again and leave a meeting. It's good to give some notice, but there are times that you have to get up and leave for whatever emergency purpose. Comments and questions on that? Nobody? Okay. Everybody's fine with that one, Mr. Clerk? And B5, Mr. Clerk, would you like to speak to that, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. This does have a degree of personal preference since the clerk's training in Ontario is in Robert's Rules of Order. So really, I don't have much more to add than what's here, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. So it'd be a flip for us going to Robert's Rules first, which majority of councils, I would assume, do that. Any questions or comments on that right now? No. Councilor Ottens?
I honestly don't know the difference. So can you clarify a little bit about what the differences would be?
Mr. Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, they have over time merged quite a bit, and the differences are there's many differences, but they're all very tiny. And I think if there was any differences on our procedural bylaw, it would be on Schedule A. And it would be, with regard to rules for motions, and they're very tiny. Thank you.
Do we need a workshop to learn this?
Thank you, Councilor Ottens. Yeah, so I know the county uses the Robert's Rules. A lot of the communities use the Robert's Rules. When I became mayor here, when I had to look at Bruneau's rules, I was like, I didn't know what that was, because legislative assemblies use Robert's Rules. So it took a little bit to go through that. A lot of them are similar, as the clerk said, but Robert's Rules seem to be the one most used by everyone. Councillor Martin, you got your mic on?
Yes, thank you. I would suggest in the 7 years that I've been on council, this has had a grand total of 0 impact on our proceedings. It honestly has, right? Because a lot of our like rules for motions under considerations are all included in our procedural bylaw already. So I don't actually think that we've had to go scrambling for, but it's kind of just in the event that our procedural bylaw doesn't speak to it, then we've got some background to it. But honestly, like, I don't think it actually is going to impact us. If it does, it'll be interesting.
And most of those pieces that you just mentioned that we have in a procedural bylaw actually come from Robert's Rules. So they're coming right out of the book. So, Mr. Clerk, I think we're okay with switching over to Robert's Rules. That's what you're trained in. Let's use it. B6, Administrative Authority of the Clerk. Mr. Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is an addition that's quite popular nowadays, and I hesitated to insert that because one of our member townships, it was heated debate about this. So, but really, it really is to tidy up typos and spelling mistakes.
Well, I don't think we need a heated debate about fixing a typo or spelling mistakes. Any questions or comments on this? To give the clerk that administrative authority to fix mistakes that are in there, not change the rules, but just to fix an error. All right, I don't see any problem with that, Mr. Clerk. Thank you. Now we go to Division C. C1, any meeting of council may be canceled or postponed when quorum cannot be achieved in an emergency where the meeting is no longer required by the head of council in consultation with the CEO and clerk. The clerk is to give notice of the cancellation of township website plus a sign on the main entrance of the township office. So that's a potential addition. Any questions or comments on that potential addition? Anybody against that potential addition? I don't see any. Okay, we'll just move down to the next item, which is C2, a potential addition. Members will attempt to advise the clerk at least 3 business days in advance if they are unable to attend a meeting. That's to make sure we have quorum. So that's what that purpose is. And I know sometimes things come up and you at last minute, but if you do know you have to work or you do know you're going to be away, then at least 3 days for the clerk. So we can make sure we have quorum. Anybody have anything against that one? All right, perfect, thank you. Section 27(1). I'm just going to flip to it. So 27(1), 27(2), 27.2 again. 27(1) just has the word any put in. I think that's just an addition. I don't think we're going to have any problems with the word any provided by any act. That's the only thing 27(1) does. Did I skip a page? We did C2. Oh, see, look at that. I flipped the wrong one. My apologies, Mr. Clerk. Thank you for putting me back on the right track. C3. I wonder why everybody looked confused. Agendas for council meetings are generally made available to council members and the public on the Thursday evening immediately preceding the meeting. Agenda for committee of adjustment meetings are made available to committee members on the Friday evening immediately preceding the meeting. Mr. Clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is our general modus operandi. However, I've noticed that a few councils are going to Wednesday evening, but direct correlation, if you go a day earlier, you will increase the number of addendums on the agenda, which isn't a good look. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Questions, comments on that one? Councillor Martin?
Thank you. Through you to the clerk, is it intentionally vague, like are generally made available? Is that phrase specifically vague versus are to be made available by the Thursday evening? I know there's always extenuating circumstances where it's delayed and I don't think anybody has an issue with it, but for the most part, I think there's a very like high percentage of the time it's made available. Is that intentionally worded that way?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is slightly vague, as you say, and we could go hard on that. I just know that after a few holiday Mondays, or in the case of department head having a large report and being under some pressure, that it's quite late in the evening on a Thursday, but hardcore is fine too. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I do not have a strong preference. I was just wondering if it was intentionally worded that way versus I think I'm perfectly fine with what the reality is at the moment. So
Perfect, thank you. Any other comments or questions on this one? All right, thank you. C4, presentations recognizing achievements of residents or staff shall be heard at the beginning of the meeting. I like this, Mr. Clerk. I've seen it in other procedural bylaws and putting it up near the beginning. I think it's a good addition. Just as tonight we recognized Ms. Brown is going on this education blitz. I know we do have a check going to presentation from the chief later on, but some of these things should be done and we should have it in the procedural bylaw listing it out when we're going to do it. Any questions or comments on that one? Okay, moving on to C5. Notwithstanding a recorded vote, a record of notation of a member's opposition to an issue is not recorded in any minutes of the meeting. That's just another one of those housekeeping pieces there to make sure that everyone knows that we're not keeping note of who voted for what, unless it's a recorded vote. Everybody okay with that? All right. So that ends C, does it not, Mr. Clerk? I just want to make sure I didn't miss something this time.
Nope, through you, Your Honor, that's perfect.
All right, so now we're into Division D, with recommendations from council. Council may have components of the existing procedural bylaw they would like to be removed, revised, rewritten, clarified, expanded. And this is where we're going to have a little bit more conversation, I think, because you know, this is important that we have the procedural bylaw. This is going to be the bylaw that's not only going to, once it's put in place, Mr. Clerk, when do we expect this to be in place, and will this council be following the new procedural bylaw?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the procedural bylaw itself is at heart the consensus of the members of the corporation, which isn't really the members here today. It's the residents. So therefore, when we make changes, when council deems to make changes, the members need 2 weeks' notice, and they will insist on a vote of 4 members of council. So I'm hoping to bring this back for consensus at the next meeting and then advertise it and attempt to get 4 members of council to support it.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. That's very helpful. So this is the opportunity. We can start in, page 1 and work our way through if you want, council. If you have some thoughts and ideas you want to add in there, we can start in page 1 and work our way down. So anybody want to start with their thoughts? Councilor Martin.
I mean, I can make it easy for you. I'm pretty familiar with the document. I'm pretty good with it as it stands. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, if someone else has more comments, but I think it's been very useful. And I don't have any particular concerns with any specific clause or portion of the procedural bylaw.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if anybody's, when you're looking through the other communities, I know I talked to Center Wellington just went through theirs. It was actually done, I hired a lawyer to do it because they needed to do that. And it's quite extensive theirs, so is Guelph Moss's. And when you go through those two, you'll see there's some additions in there that we don't have that may be important to our group. But that, again, that's subjective to what you were thinking. Mr. Craven?
I too am pretty good with the whole thing, really. I don't think we need to, I want to commend Larry on the hard work he's done with this and done a fine job.
Okay. And Councilor Ottens, I know I have some thoughts that I want to put forward, so Councilor Ottens?
I don't have, thank you through you, Mayor Davidson. I don't have any specific thoughts about it as far as applying it to us, but I found it interesting that several councils do their closed sessions at the beginning of a scheduled meeting, and I find that kind of cumbersome since it's an unpredictable length and people have already arrived. And so I wondered if anybody knew why some councils would do it that way.
Mr. Clerk, I know that with county, we do it pretty well close to the beginning as well. And I did see that as the same point as you. I like the way we have it at the end, just because that allows everyone to leave, including staff, and go home instead of waiting for us to go. And if the closed meeting's an hour and a half, which sometimes it can be, then everyone's sitting and waiting for us. I like how we do it at the end. And Mr. Craven?
Not only that, if we have the closed session before we have a regular meeting, we really do want to start a regular meeting at 7 o'clock or 1 o'clock, whichever. And we might be pressured into making hasty decisions at the closed meeting because all of a sudden we're looking at the clock and here it is 10 minutes to the regular meeting. We haven't decided yet. We better make this decision and get on with it. So I'd sooner have it afterwards. That way we're not under pressure to hurry up to get started with the regular meeting.
Well, Mr. Craven, the closed meeting, the regular meeting would start at 7. You do your basic procedurals, and then you would start in the close somewhere after 7. So yeah, it does get a little cumbersome. So you have people come into the room and you start your meeting, you single candidate, and then you send them out again during the closed meeting. So it's a little bit cumbersome.
I like the close afterwards for sure.
I know the reporters like the better at the end too, I'm sure. They can go home. Mr. Clerk, Councilor Ottens had a question. If you know the answer why other communities do it at the beginning, that's.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I assume they all have their own logic. I believe that the reporting out feature of a closed meeting, they believe that's probably more open to the public if it's done at the first of the meeting, whereas we may report out, 11 o'clock at night, but that report out still makes it on the agenda. And so I would advise to stay with our Mapleton tradition.
No. Yeah, we're going to stay with that, Mr. Clerk. I'm just going to ask some, I'm just going to go through it, Mr. Clerk, and got some specific questions, and we'll see what others think as we go through this. On the first page, on item 1.f, you have here, meeting means any regular, special, or other meeting. Can we not just put any meeting, or do we need to have it specifically outlined, regular, special, or other? Meeting means any meeting of council or committee. Why is it laid out the regular, special, or other?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it perhaps does go into more detail than is necessary. That's just tradition too, but I guess it means regular, special, the inaugural meeting, education sessions, workshops. I believe it's meant to be all encompassing.
So council, can we clean this up a little bit and just put any meeting of council instead of, so we're not missing anything, it's just or other, which means any meeting. If we just leave it as any meeting of council. Any problems with just changing, taking those words out? Okay. Nope. Yeah, I didn't want to, to me, the clearest thing is any meeting instead of trying to lay it all out. I don't see anybody opposed to removing those, any regular meeting of special. Can you see any problems if we remove that, Mr. Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's unlikely to cause a problem, to be fair. It could be in there because of, you do have your coffee with council sessions that aren't meetings. You may accidentally, three councilors riding in a car together. So there is the odd horror story, but they're far and few between.
Thank you. If we go to item 3 on the next page, it's speaking of the absence of the head of council. Again, just to clean this up a little bit, when you look at Center Wellington's or Guelph Moss's, they seem to have it laid out in point form. When the head of council is absent and you've inserted unable or refuses to act for any reason, including conflict of interest, is this something we can, in my opinion, it's, the head of council is absent from a meeting, period. Doesn't matter what the reason is, if they're absent from a meeting. And I think we need to include in there, on the arrival of the mayor or acting mayor, and we do have an acting mayor that we've instituted with in this term of council. So on the arrival of the mayor or acting mayor, the chair shall relinquish their seat. So whoever's sitting in the seat, and if the acting mayor is sitting in the seat and the mayor shows up, they relinquish the seat. If, say, Councillor Ottens is sitting in the seat because Councillor Martin and I are both absent, if either one of us should show up, then they relinquish the seat to either the mayor or the acting mayor. I noticed that in other documents, procedural bylaws, and I'm wondering if that is something we should also insert into our procedural bylaw, just to make sure if there is an issue. And this is, again, procedural bylaw is going for not just this council, but councils coming down, because it's probably not going to look at this for another five years, the next council, just to make sure everyone understands. And that's what the procedural bylaw to me is it's a set of, here's what's going to happen when during this session. So I just look at that as, cleaning this up a little bit when the head of council is absent from a meeting, regardless of the reason. And making sure that, if the mayor or acting mayor arrives, then whoever is the chair at that time will relinquish the seat. Any thoughts on that, Mr. Clerk? Because I know you've seen all the other bylaws, procedural bylaws.
No comment one way or the other. It's certainly different in every bylaw, every procedural bylaw in the county.
Council, any thoughts? Council Craven?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. We maybe should have something there that if, for instance, Marlene, as you say, was sitting in the chair and you and Mike were absent at the start of the meeting, we went on, had some of the meeting, then one or both of you came in, then it's very clear that she has to step aside and let either one of you take her place without having you to go up there and shove her out of the road to get into the chair. I think this lays it out very clear as to how that is going to happen.
Get out of the chair, Martin. Yes. Councillor Martin?
So, yeah, I support the, or I echo Councillor Craven's support for a relinquishing statement. I think that, so I don't like comparing ourselves to Center Wellington. I think there's very different dynamics at the moment, but that's all been very well publicized. Yeah, so I mean, comparing our procedural bylaws, I think is going to be fun, but not real productive. So, but I do think, you know, to just leave it as absent doesn't specifically speak to the other potential scenarios, which we do not have here, but if we're going to have a procedural bylaw that's going to be livable and works for councils going forward, unable or refuses to act for any reason, including conflict of interest, is important to keep in there. It doesn't affect us at the moment, but, you know, Lord willing, if the creek don't rise, it'll stay that way, right? But we don't know, right? Maybe we'll find ourselves in a colorful spot too someday. So I think that part is nice to keep, although I like your philosophy of not so wordy and make it precise. But I think if we leave those two other portions out, it won't speak to all the scenarios that I think this clause is trying to address.
My worry is that there's a clause we're missing, and that's why I was saying I had put it from unable from any meeting, because I worry that there might be something that comes up that isn't listed here. It says absent from or unable or refuses. So I don't know what that clause might be. That's what my worry was. So if we can add in there, Mr. Clerk, on the arrival of the mayor, the acting mayor, the chair shall relinquish a seat. I think we're somewhere in here, Mr. Clerk, we were also discussing, I don't know if it's in here or if it needs to be in here, that we do have the acting mayor position. Is it needing to be in here? If the mayor is absent, then the acting mayor should be in place.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have an appointing bylaw where that is clearly stated,
But not in the procedural bylaw itself.
not in the procedural
Okay.
bylaws.
And I'm wondering, council, if we should add in, and I noticed this in, again, other procedural bylaws, the mayor shall be an ex officio member of all committees and shall have full voting rights. And of course, if the mayor is absent for any reason, ill, for example, then the acting mayor would step in that position. Mr. Clerk, I noticed that in others. Is that in a different document than this one?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe it isn't. It is not.
So is anybody,
It's in our other document that talks about committees, that the mayor is the ex officio on all of them. I think I don't know that we would need it in the procedural bylaw, but I believe it specifically states in the.
yeah, and I thought I saw it in the other documents, and I noticed that in procedural bylaws of other areas, they actually have it right in there, so. All right, appointing bylaw, thank you. And just go down to the item number 7 for council. And I'm going to talk, the first thing is call to order. The second item is O Canada. And I'm going to ask council if they would like to keep that in the agenda as a listing, because I noticed that some have it and some don't. Mr. Craven?
Absolutely.
Councilor Otten's good? Okay, then we'll keep that in there. Thank you. That was a question that was brought up to me when I first became mayor, whether we want to keep that or not. And I said yes. I just want to make sure that council is the same. Moving down. So, Mr. Clerk, for presentations and announcements, do you have an idea of where that's going to be in this listing? Or is it going to be after matters arising from minutes or after the Planning Act, or is it going to be before that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I envisioned it not having it here. Simply being in the procedural bylaw.
So not actually in the agenda piece. And there's correspondence for council's direction and correspondence for council's information. That's the pieces that are put in the back. Some communities don't have it at all. And I want to know if council wants to continue having those pieces that are added into the back from other areas for discussion purposes. Yep, okay. And council, I'd like it to, your thought here. And it's adding an item to this is that oftentimes we get our agenda and there's pieces that we're not actually speaking to. So if we add item 7.4, the reorder of agenda, the clerk may remove headings deemed not relevant except declaration of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. That was in other procedural bylaws, and I think it's that will take some of those lines out for us, so the clerk can just remove it, so that they'll clean up the agenda when we're actually doing it. So that would mean that if we don't have any delegations, or any delegations or any items of the Planning Act, they actually won't even appear on our agenda for that week. So we don't actually have that line. That gives the clerk the right to take those out for that particular meeting. Councillor Martin.
Would there, thank you, Mr. Mayor, to that point, would there be an issue with the template? Like, is there not a standard template in the background where things get fed into? And if there's nothing in a particular heading, nobody says we have to talk about it. We just skip to the next one that has something in it, right? So
That's fine. I understand your point. I'm just, Mr. Clerk, would it be an issue pulling it off if it's there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it would be a simple thing to delete it, but Councillor Martin's right. Quite often when people are doing some research from meetings a year or two ago, they'll always go, say, to point 6. They'll look in point 6 in every meeting for what it is they want. So it's quite helpful to have it in there.
So from Mr. Martin, as Councilor Martin has stated that he, from what I understand, Councilor Martin, you would like to keep it the way it is and not have things removed out of it. Is that how I take what your statement is? Is everyone with Councilor Craven? You keep it in? Okay. Yep, okay. Item 7.2, Mr. Clerk, it says any member of council may file in writing an item for inclusion in the agenda under new business. We don't actually have an item in the agenda under new business, so would that be other business? Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, definitely it is other business.
Okay, thank you. Just bear with me a second here. Item 15.2, and I think we spoke to this earlier with some of the clerk's changes. No person shall be permitted to address council on a subject not on the agenda unless by permission of council by 2/3 vote. I believe, Mr. Clerk, we had this a couple times where members of the community had shown up. And we allowed them to speak on the item. Because let's face it, when you put out, we're asking people who want to be a delegation to have their notice of delegation in on the Tuesday prior to the following Tuesday's meeting. But the agenda doesn't come out till the Thursday or Friday. And if people are to read on the weekend, they can't come and delegate about it. So again, on other people's procedural bylaws, they have in there that either one or two, that they have it, that people can actually sign up to be a delegate on the Monday prior to, so it'll be Monday before the Tuesday meeting, so it would have been yesterday by noon hour, and another has it by 11 a.m. of that morning. I like the day before, but that gives people the opportunity, if they read the agenda on the weekend, to actually sign up to be a delegate to speak at our council meeting. And I know that's been an issue with a number of members of the community in the past that have contacted me and said it's not fair. So if we could add a piece in there, I think that would allow the community, after reading the agenda on the weekend, to sign up on the Monday before noon hour saying, I'd like to speak to a certain item on the agenda. I think that'd be very helpful for the community to actually, for us to be open and communication with the community on these agenda pieces. So I'd like council to discuss that, please. Councilor Martin?
I reflect back to a scenario this summer with a small town out in BC that got themselves in a fair amount of hot water over this. I think the intent, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the intent is to make sure that if you're looking or wish to speak at council about anything particular, that you sign up as a delegation, you provide materials so that council's familiar with. So it creates decorum and it's not a free for all. I mean, it's not something we deal with, to be honest, but I think in the event of a colorful issue that people wish to speak to, there's a process. And I'm not sure that, sign up the day before necessarily accomplishes all the objectives that we want to have for our meeting, like with decorum and respect and all. Not to say that they're always going to be negative delegations. But I guess I don't know how, because your point's well taken, if they want to discuss something on the agenda that they wouldn't have seen prior to. Are you suggesting that to be a delegate to speak to it after it's already spoken at a meeting and potentially decided is kind of too late?
No, what I'm suggesting is, if you recall, we had a development, it would have been last summer, development just outside of Drayton, where a number of residents came to that meeting. And they were sending emails after the agenda came out. They had heard about the red line changes, and they came out to the meeting. This would allow those residents to sign up to actually come and speak. I know we allowed them to speak, and we had heard quite a bit. And that was a little more chaotic to me because there wasn't a set list of people to speak. It was almost, we had opened it up for a free for all. And I would rather have it, to keep the decorum of the community, the meeting, is to have these people, the residents sign up and to speak at the issue. They have a day before to sign up to come. So we don't have 50 people that we're sitting there waiting for that might want to speak. We know that we have 10 that are going to speak. That's the kind of what I'm looking at to keep the council meeting running smoothly.
I have on occasion had somebody call me on an issue and wanted to discuss it and wondered if they would be able to address council on that issue. I have told them, yes, but you have to register ahead of time to do it. Oh, I don't want to bother doing that. And this would typically be an older person that didn't want to register, and just wanted to come and speak to us. And I often thought that maybe we should try and listen to those people quite often, because the chair of council would have the authority, if the person addressed council and got off topic or got a little bit erratic about what he was talking about, to end the conversation right there and then and have him expelled from the council chamber if necessary, just to get rid of him if you have to. So I think if we can let them come and speak if they want to, I think that's a good idea maybe. Because not everybody wants to register ahead of time.
Thank you. I think we have two different issues here. So we have delegations on a new issue that they wish to bring to us, which I feel needs to have some advanced time for them to register, to provide the materials that we want. So we have time to read what they're presenting. And then we have people who want to speak to an issue that's on our agenda, which we may not have decided on it yet. We're just discussing it as well. It could be like developments or parks or whatever. So I think that's a different deadline that we should have. So it's two completely different things as far as publicly speaking at our meetings. And I think we need two different deadlines for those people. I'm fine with the day before if people have signed up because they see something's on our agenda and they wish to express their opinion on it, whether it's allowing basement apartments or a pot shop or, you know, an apartment building. I mean, they want to talk about it, right? And I get it. And what Counselor Craven mentioned about someone who has an issue, if it's truly a current issue and not just a random rant, then I feel like if that's strong enough, they should be a delegation and bring their issue up to us. And if it's a agenda item, then they can speak to that as well. But if they just want to come here and rant about a few things, well, that's fine. They can do that, but they have to register as a delegation.
Thank you, Councilor Otten. So you're in favor of adding that piece in that if they see something on the agenda, they have until say 12 noon the day before, so the Monday prior to. So that's what you're suggesting, that you're agreeing to. We have two sets. You're right. There's two types of delegations. Something like Urania was today. She's a delegation coming to provide information. Or you have someone that just read the agenda and they would like to speak to that piece on the agenda, either for or opposed. So, Councilor Martin?
Thank you. As long as we're being very clear that meetings held under the Planning Act are very different than agenda items, right? Because the meeting under the Planning Act allow for impromptu public feedback, right? And there's a process to document all that. So as long as meetings under the Planning Act remain as they are, I think if we've got people who like to speak to a particular agenda item, outside of that, I'm good with that.
Thank you. And you're right, under the Planning Act is totally different. Mr. Barron?
Thank you, Worship. And Councilor Craven, if we ever get into a situation where somebody's feeling uncomfortable, Mr. Wheeler won't brag about himself, but I can guarantee you that the level of customer service he provides is second to none, and he would absolutely fill out that for the individual. So don't let that be a barrier, please, and you can encourage him. And Clerk Wheeler will absolutely be happy to fill out the delegation form on behalf of the resident.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. Mr. Craven?
So if somebody contacted me on Thursday or Friday, wanted to address the council, but they didn't want to call here and register for the thing, could I register for them?
Mr. Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I certainly like that in theory, but I would be taking direction from the CAO on that.
Mr. Barron?
I just can't, through your worship, I can't imagine if it's an issue that we believe strongly enough, why we wouldn't talk to the clerk directly. I mean,
I do agree with you, Mr. Barron. The Clerk Wheeler is excellent at his job. So I say to council, to the clerk, that we can add that piece in then? Is that all right? Moving that piece in? Ms. Martin?
I mean, I would suggest that 15.2 already is adequate, that if that in fact happens and someone wants to come to speak to an item agenda, council can make that call at the time, right? It's right there, like a 2/3 vote and boom, away we go, right? I think it's there already, to be honest.
It is there. However, I think having people to register and we know exactly who's speaking is much simpler for council, so we have that. So, Mr. Clerk, if you can add that piece in then, please. That I don't know, we want to 12 o'clock PM, 11 PM the day before. I'll leave that up to you to pick out the number, how that's going to work for you.
Can we do a vote or something on that just before we just include it in, like just to make sure everyone, that's what we want, or is it a consensus already?
I was just
or-
going by nods of the head, but right? I know that Councillor Craven and Councillor Otten's both give a nod on that, so that's why I went with that way. I'm going to speak to an item that I'd like to add in, a 15.7. And again, this came up rather recently. We have people wanting to speak to their own agenda coming to council, which really there's nothing we can do about it because it's something for another say for the legislature or the Parliament of Canada, not for us, but they want to come to council to maybe speak to it. We've seen it in some emails coming up forward. So item 15.7, no delegation shall speak on a matter that is not within the jurisdiction of the council or committee. The mayor and the committee chairs, in consultation with the clerk, will determine if a matter is within the jurisdiction of the council or committee. Again, that's taken from other procedural bylaws. I like that idea, being that if someone wants to come and speak about vaccine mandate, that's a provincial policy, that's not ours. And this would alleviate anybody coming to speak and provide, well, their own platform for whatever business they're trying to put forward that has nothing to do with council. Councilor Craven?
Well, it provides the head of council, whoever's in charge of the meeting, a way to say to people, sorry, we can't deal with that. That's not part of our issue. It's in our procedure bylaw to not do that. So goodbye.
Thank you, Councilor Craven. Councilor Ottens, thoughts on that?
Would they not be informed by staff when they apply to be a delegation and are filling out the form? Would Larry not say, well, that's not a municipal issue? Do you really want to spend time addressing council on that? Is that not a better way to tell them?
Well, this is actually putting it down in our
Yeah.
procedural bylaws that this is what, so that if anybody reads it, this is actually how it's going. And then the clerk and the chair of the committee or the clerk and the mayor will decide whether that is going to be something that's going to address the committee or of council.
I'm a little hesitant on being so arbitrary about absolutely don't speak about certain things here. Because it can be very situational. So I'm a little hesitant about saying no across the board to that.
But that's the discussion that the clerk and the mayor or the clerk and the chair of the committee would have to see whether it's relevant to that. So if you have someone wanting to come and speak to the Parks and Rec Committee about a road, well, it's not appropriate, right? So then the clerk and that chair can make that decision and say, no, that's not appropriate. You should go here. So it's just, to me, I like seeing that in the other procedural bylaws. I think I saw it in about 2 or 3 of them. And it just made it really clear of we're not going to be listening to delegations of items that as a council, we can't do anything about. And Mr. Clerk, maybe you want to speak to Councillor Otten's thought that you already do this. I don't know.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In my time so far, we've said have said no to a delegation, never. And that's not to say that I'm judging whether to put this in or not, but we haven't turned away anyone.
Councilor Craven?
You might get somebody that comes to our council meeting, registered ahead of time, want to speak to amendment, whatever, comes and speaks for 5 minutes on the amendment, then his second 5 minutes deal with the matter that has nothing to do with the township. This leaves the head of council an opportunity to say, sorry, we can't do that because it doesn't, none of our business.
Thank you, Councilor Craven. Councilor Martin?
Sorry. Yeah, I think I would probably agree with Councillor Ottens. I think I hesitate with having any sort of filtering mechanism there. I don't think I don't necessarily think that any committee chair or head of council should necessarily filter who comes to speak. But I also think I understand your point about matters that don't actually relate to us, but I also think that if we want to use vaccines, for example, aren't a municipal mandate, but the easy way around that is coming looking for a resolution of council to protest the provincial mandate, right? Like there'd be so many ways you could walk around it if that's how you chose. I struggle with kind of having the arbitrary nature of something like that. So I'd probably not support it.
The other thought process is that, say it's something to do with the county roads or, something to do with the county, and they're coming to the township, and, they could be told, no bother coming to the township. We can't do anything. You have to go to the county and go to their committees. So, for example, with crosswalks, I know that at the present time that, we You know, they come to us to talk about a crosswalk on a county road. We have to go and then talk to the county about that. Hopefully in the future, it'll just be on the county's dot, you know, everything will be at the county. But it'll give the opportunity to say, you know, you're not going to speak to that here at Township Council. Please make your way over to the county and do it there.
Thank you. I would argue that they were actually quite successful in coming to the township in that particular case though, because we're actually doing something about it, even though the county should be, right? So there's that. So I don't.
Yeah, well, that's
well
just
taken.
now, but if it changes where the funding and everything comes through the county, if we get the changes that we're looking for, then they would know exactly where to go. So I think I can see both sides of this item. I just like the clarity that the delegation would not come and present to council something we can't do. So that's, you know, 10 minutes of their time. That is, you know, actually more than 10 minutes because they got to get here, present and wait for the presentation. So it'll be a few hours of their time. Whereas we can say to them, sorry, this doesn't really pertain to council. Please don't come here to speak to that item because we can't change anything for you. And we would direct them to the proper, you know, area to have that consultation. I think it's an important piece to add in to allow us to be able to do that and not have presentations to council that are going to be frankly a waste of time for the presenter as well as for council. Yeah, we'll put our hands up for this one then. Would you like to include that piece? No delegation shall speak on a matter that is not within the jurisdiction of the council or committee. The mayor and the committee chairs, in conjunction with the clerk, will determine if a matter is within the jurisdiction of the council or committee. That's what I'm proposing we add in. And we'll just see a show of hands. Who wants to add that in and who does not? So if you want to add it in, put up your hand, please. And you don't want to add it in? There's a tie, so that's lost then. Okay, thank you. We have in our procedural bylaw 2 areas which have notice of motion. Item 21 is notice of motion, and then we go to motions and rules of debate in item 30. Mr. Clerk, I'm wondering if is it possible to bring all that into one area regarding motions? So it's not in 2 separate areas?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, is definitely possible. There's a few behavioral items that are also duplicated.
Would that be acceptable to council to kind of bring all that into one area so that you don't have to look back and forth? So item 21 and item 30. We can bring it all into one area. The clerk can bring it all into one general area and clean that up for us. So item 30, motions and rules of debate. Well, it's, if we can bring all motions into one area is what I'm saying. Motions and areas of debate, regardless if it's a notice of motion or a motion and rules of debate, bring all the motions into one area instead of having it in 2 different areas. I think it would just clean things up for myself. Any thoughts on this? I know Councilor Martin, your head's spinning right now.
No, thank you. I just think notice of motion is like a new business item, right? So it's very distinct and very different than how we vote on a particular motion or the rules that are, because those motions happen all meeting long, right?
Councilor Ottens?
I agree with Councillor Martin that it's a different thing, that perhaps if they were lumped together, so one could read them chronologically, because right after 31, you have voting on motions. So you got notice of motion, motions, and then voting on motions. So if they were together but separate, that might solve both problems.
That was my point, just that not have them so separate, but bring them into the same area of the bylaw.
I would just suggest that the reason that the notice provision or notice of motion is there is because the procedural bylaw is laid out in such a way that it's working its way through the agenda. All right, so that's kind of why notice of motion is sitting there. And then after confirmatory bylaw, we start talking about, actual procedures for the meeting itself. So that's kind of how it's laid out, I think.
All right. So so we could leave it where it is if the council wants to leave it where it is, if it's following along, as Councillor Martin has pointed out. I thought just bring it together would be a little easier, but we can leave it there. Speaking to the notice of motion, item 21. Notice of motion shall be given verbally or in writing at a previous meeting of council. A, to amend, repeal, or alter this procedural bylaw. B, to introduce any measure or change in the council's established policy. Mr. Clerk, I know it's not our tradition of doing things, but is this, the way it says in the notice of motion, is it limiting because it says introduce any measure or change of the council's established policy? But what if it's something brand new, it's not in policy, and it's nothing to do with this procedural bylaw? Would it still fit in here? And I know we do it in practice, but I'm thinking of the verbiage part of this. Because if we brought up automated speed enforcement, for example, it's not part of our policy, but this says introduce any measure or change in council's established policy. So is introduce any measure, is that what covers it? And the or piece, I just want clarification.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor, I see this quite open-ended. And to be honest with you, given verbally or writing at a previous meeting of council, certainly you couldn't actually alter a procedural bylaw. You just wouldn't have time to advertise for 2 weeks, and that's required for a procedural bylaw. Having said that, with a majority of council, you can change the order of the agenda, but
Mr. Martin?
Yeah, I think how I read that is item C will touch exactly what you're talking about, right? So any verbal notice of motion, right? So you can make any motion, like any notice of motion you wish, like new business. It doesn't have to be about procedural bylaw or established policy. Item C looks after all of that kind of, new businessy type stuff is how I read it, but.
Yeah, and I didn't read it that way, and that's why I have the clarification in there, because to me, it's very limiting. A and B kind of, to me, limits it. And then C is, this is what you have to do in order to move a motion. In practice, we haven't, we do as you're suggesting. But I was wondering if it needs to be laid out in a better format that it's clear, more clear, especially for any new member of council coming on. Because I don't find that very clear. Mr. Clerk, any thoughts on that?
through you, Mr. Mayor, no thoughts other than perhaps council could direct the clerk to have a look at what other townships are doing and come back at the next meeting.
Would council be okay with that? The clerk could look through it and try to clean it up. All right, thank you. Mr. Clerk, thank you very much. I'm going to bring everyone back to the very final page, 11 of 11 then. And this is the rules for motions under consideration. Item C and item D are both motions to defer. And then I think almost every procedural bylaw I read, there was only one motion to defer. Here we have two. And I'm wondering if council will be okay to remove item C and leave item D. Because I believe every motion needs to have a decision. And to defer it to a specific time is what we should be doing, and we shouldn't be deferring the matter completely. So I'm wondering if council would be all right with removing C and leaving D. They almost say the exact same thing, except one is motion to defer to a specific time, which we have done a number of times in this term of council. Deferred it for a number of weeks until we got more information, or for another look at another report, or to have more, as Councilor Martin sometimes says, to think about it a little bit longer, and that's fine. And I just think that moving it to a specific time is what we normally do, and removing C would be beneficial. Mr. Clerk, is there any issue with removing C before we go ahead and talk about it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no issue at all with removing item C.
Councilor Craven?
I think I agree with that. Yeah. It says everything the C does, except it defines a specific time. It doesn't matter when you can defer to next week or next month or next year if you want. So really, C doesn't say anything that D doesn't.
Thank you, Councilor Craven. Councilor Ottens? Okay, Councilor Martin, good. So Mr. Clerk, if we can remove item C then, please. And as we speak to item D, there's a motion to defer, and point 1 is not open to debate. Some procedural bylaws have not open to debate. Other procedural bylaws have open to debate. And in my opinion, it should be debatable whether we actually defer a motion. Now, some might say that the debate is the vote itself. It's just something that, Mr. Clerk, do you recall what the rules of order are when it says defer? Does the Robert's rules have it as debatable? I can't recall.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I could, that's one I could come back at the next meeting and with clarification if you'd like.
I'd like more clarification on that. Did the council like more of a clarification on that, or any further discussion on that point? Councilor Martin?
I think you see it, not at this level in particular, but motion to defer are sometimes used exactly for that reason, that they're not open to debate. So I would suspect that any information coming back, like that's part of it, right? So I suspect that's in there specifically for a reason.
Councilor Craven?
Should we have have added to it that to defer an amendment, defer an application of any kind, because we're not sure about the decision, we don't have all the information yet. Should we have a limit on the number of times it can be deferred?
Mr. Clerk, I don't think there's something in the rule book that says you can have a limit, is there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I've never seen a limit. No.
Thank you. Would it be okay to council for the clerk to come back and just, as we already said, we're going to go with Robert's rules, to look to see what Robert's rules says about that being debatable or not? Okay, Mr. Clerk, will you bring that back, please? The last thought I have, council, is that in a number of procedural bylaws, it limits the amount of conversation that council members can have. And I know we have enjoyed great debate and not having a limit. Some councils have a 5-minute limit. You can only speak once to an item. Some have, you can only speak twice to an item. We have had an open policy here since I've been mayor, and I kind of like that, but I want to bring that up as if you think that we should have a limit on discussion of any item. Councilor Otten says no. Councilor Craven says no. Councilor Martin?
No, I would suggest that we already have in our procedural bylaw that, and like your ability to speak multiple times on a subject is, everyone else needs a chance to speak on it once, right? Before one person keeps repeatedly going. So I enjoy that part of our procedural bylaw, and that everybody gets a chance, but time wise, like I ramble, so.
Yeah, it's more like, I know that, you know, I saw one, it's like you get to speak once to an item, that's it. And I like our open dialogue with your Councilor Craven.
I like the open too, because if we have a bit of a discussion debate and Councilor Otten says something and then Douglas says something, and all of a sudden either one of us or the other way around decide, oh, I want to comment on that, but I can't because I've already commented on this issue. I want to comment or add to what they've said, and you really can't because you've already spoken the issue.
That's actually my worry as well, and that's why I like having the open conversation, the open debate. I think that that's worked really well for us. I just wanted to bring it forward to council because it is in the other procedural bylaws, and they limit it for their reasons, and I didn't want to do that here, but I wanted to leave it open for council's decision on that. Councilor Martin?
Thanks. As you were talking there, I think what limiting it would do would be we're going to have that conversation anyway, right? So whether it happens here or outside, that discussion is going to happen. And if you limit the discussion here, it's just going to drive it underground. And I think that just goes contrary to public interest and stuff. So.
Thank you, Councilor Martin. Well, that's all I have right now, council. You can be relieved now. I have nothing left on my page. It is, you know, procedural bylaw is actually something very important to all of us. And I'm glad you gave me that time to go through it a little bit deeper and ask those questions that were coming up for me. Anything else you need at this point, Mr. Clerk? Have we clarified enough?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. No, I think I'm fine, and you'll hear back from me in 2 weeks.
Any other comments from council at this point? See none? All right, I do have the resolution here. Let's see if I pull it forward. It's a long one. Thanks, Mr. Clerk. That moved by Councillor Ottens and second by Councillor Craven, that the Township Mapleton Council received for information Clerk's Report 2021-12 dated October 26, 2021 regarding a new draft procedural bylaw. And further, that the alterations and additions as outlined by the clerk in Division A of this report be incorporated into a second draft of the proposed procedural bylaw for consideration at the regular meeting of council scheduled for November 9th, 2021, with the exception of sections, and that we didn't have any exceptions, Mr. Clerk. And further, that the concepts as outlined by the clerk in Division B of this report be incorporated into a second draft of proposed procedural bylaw for consideration at the regular meeting of council scheduled for November 9th, 2021. And Mr. Clerk would have any exceptions in there that he'll add in later. And further, that the potential additions as outlined by the clerk in Division C of this report be incorporated into the second draft of proposed procedural bylaw for consideration at the regular meeting of council scheduled November 9th, 2021. And further, that the recommendations of council put forth as per Division D of this report be incorporated into a second draft of the proposed procedural bylaw for consideration at the regular meeting of council scheduled for November 9th, 2021. And further, that proper notice of council's intention to consider a procedural bylaw or amendment thereto be given by the clerk in the time and format necessary to satisfy notice provision bylaw 2008-024. Any further questions or comments then? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Now bear with me a second as I shuffle all the papers and find my agenda again. And the next item is item 9.2, operating budget variance report. Mr. Morrison.
Through your worship, this report is the Q3 operating results that being presented to council with our projection of what's going to happen at the end of 2021. If in any given single year, if we were operating a single budget, the projection that being offered could end up a small surplus or a small deficit still with a Q3, Q4 operating results unknown. I'd like to remind council that this is the third year of a 3-year budget, and we're going into this year at $485,000 surplus. So we will have a surplus at the end of the 3 years. I'm just not sure if year 3 will have a surplus. So if you want to ask me any questions, I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Questions then for the finance director? Seeing none. You have the recommendation here, moved by Councillor Craven, second by Councillor Ottens. Township Mapleton Council received finance report FIN 2021-20 regarding the Q3 2021 operating budget variance as information. Councillor Craven.
So just a comment or question to John. Going through this budget book, a few things that I underlined that I noticed, and mostly what I underlined was insurance costs. You suggest $184,000 surplus. If it hadn't been for the outrageous insurance increases, the surplus could have been a bit higher than that would have been.
Mr. Morrison.
Through you, your worship, yes, we've been losing almost $85,000 a year on insurance. So we need to adjust it into the budget so that we're not absorbing such losses going forward.
Thank you. Any further questions? All in favor of receiving this? It's carried. Moving on to the next item, we have a 9.31 acceptance of an Enbridge Gas Safe Communities Projects check. Chief.
Okay, this is in response to a ad that came out with the Fire Safety Council, offering some Enbridge money to support firefighting training and fire prevention literature and materials. And so we had to take the application and fill it out. Tell them our population and confirm that we were Enbridge customers in this area. We made an application for $5,000 and we were successful in getting that $5,000, which we were glad. And to complete this acceptance of the check, there's a bunch of things we have to do, but line 3 says take a photo with the fire chief or other department members, include your safe community project, assist purchases. A presentation check will be provided for the photo, which we have here. So I'm hoping to make this twofold today, is to get a picture taken by our press, hopefully, that they can put in the paper and we can provide that to Enbridge to prove that we have accepted the money and are going to put it to good use. This money is put into a credit for our use from the Fire Safety Council. They have a distribution center that has lots of things we can purchase, training wise, education wise, and we have to use it up by Friday, January 28th, 2022. So we will start doing that as soon as we get this check.
Thank you, Chief, and no pressure on you, Patrick. Do a picture there. I have the recommendation here, moved by Councillor Otten, second by Councillor Craven, that Township Mapleton Council accept the check in the amount of $5,000 to assist with the Safe Communities Project Assist. Any questions for the chief on this? All those in favor? That's carried. Chief, let's Thank you, Chief, and moving on to item 9.32, which you have the tiered response agreement. Chief?
This is a agreement we have with the ambulance service to tell the fire department which calls they need help with, which ones we should be responding to first, especially when they're not around. The ambulance is around a lot more than they were 2 years ago because of COVID. They're dispatched of the Drayton Hall quite often. So the county chiefs all came up with a updated version of what we want, what we think that we can get 2 calls and make a difference if the ambulance is not within 20 minutes around within 20 minutes. There are some things that even if the ambulance is around that we need to respond to. So I know at our county meeting, Mapleton added burns and blunt trauma because of some farm accidents we get. We want to be there with the ambulance to support them. And with burns, we have had a couple of cases in the last 2 years where we got there with a burn that the fire department had some things to take care of there besides the burn. And one case we got there half hour before the ambulance to try to provide some relief to the burn. So we feel comfortable with these things being the things that we need to pass on to Guelph Wellington EMS, and they have approved this, or they're endorsed it. But we have to approve it from a council point of view to confirm these are the calls we're going to go to.
Thank you, Chief. We do have here moved by Councillor Craven, second by Councillor Ottens, that the Mapleton Fire Rescue sign an agreement with Guelph Wellington EMS regarding the dispatching of the fire department to medical calls. Questions, comments? Councillor Martin.
Okay, so just real quickly, so chief, through you to the fire chief. To the more the wording part about the letter of agreement. So item D, that this agreement acknowledges that fire emergencies take precedence over requests for medical tiered response. This is kind of a standard type of wording, but as far as obviously, my side gig, but from a council end of thing and a level of service, when would we ever have a situation where a fire emergency would take precedence over a medical emergency? Are we really not going to send somebody to a choking baby just because we're fighting a barn fire? Like, this is not trying to say that we're valuing property over a medical emergency, correct? So we'd still find a way, or what would be a situation where this clause would get enacted?
Chief?
Yeah, that's a clause that's across the province, as you know, Councillor Martin. We talked about this at Chiefs meeting too, and like the only thing they relate to is if we had a medical call come in the same time as a fire call, which is probably one in a million, we would send a team to the fire call also, but we would send a rescue truck with a small crew to the medical call also. So we're not saying we ignore medical calls by any means, but if we do get a medical call and there's a fire call at the same time, we are going to go to the fire call also.
Thank you, Chief. Further questions, comments? And call the question, all in favor? That's carried, thank you. Moving on. We have correspondence for council's information there. There's a number of items in there, being 12 of them. Anybody wish to speak to any of those 12? No. Councillor Ottens, anything? Councillor Craven? No. Notice the motion that is in there has been withdrawn by Councillor Martin. No notice of provision. Other business, item number 15. Councillor Ottens.
Yes, a couple little things just for information. I'm not sure if anyone was aware that the Ontario Dairy Board filmed a commercial here in Mapleton maybe a month or two ago, and it's airing now on TV. So if you see it, then you can know that that's a Mapleton Dairy Farm being featured. It's the farm. They wanted a granddaughter and grandfather in this scenario to show the dairy industry. So it's the Kroll Farm, and they show a little girl in a blonde ponytail shoveling in the barn. So that's filmed right over on the 16th here in Mapleton. And the other thing, the last night, Historical Society had an interesting talk about the black settlers of Mapleton Township and Wellington County in general. It was quite very informative, and I learned a lot. And it turns out that the original settlers of this whole region via the Queen's Bush were all black settlers. And they were eventually pushed out by government regulation, of course, but it is what it is, history, and but it's very interesting to learn that it's not always what you think.
Thank you, Councillor Ottens. And you're right. There's also a video, if people didn't get to go out to that, the county has on their website for the museum. They do have a video on the Queen's Bush and the black settlers, which is excellent as well. And you're right. The settlers were in this area were a black community. So, Councillor Craven?
Yeah, I talked to Patty Wright about this. I don't know if I need a notice of motion exactly or not, but I know of a few yards in our urban area with chickens in the backyard. A couple of complaints on them. The one in Ross I had a complaint on. I haven't had a complaint from the one that's next door to me yet. But I think we should look into having a bylaw to address chickens in the backyard as opposed to what we have now. I think we need to be proactive on this instead of reactive, because as we develop our lots more and more, we're going to get more and more people that want to come to the city to this area and think, oh, it's just a rural area. I can have a few chickens in my backyard. They're not very sanitary. They're clean, not clean. We have a bylaw now that restricts livestock in urban areas, but it doesn't address anything in particular. And some of these backyards chickens, people also have a rooster. Roosters could tend to be a little noisy, and if you have people that are trying to sleep and the rooster is making a noise, it doesn't go over very good. So I think I already mentioned to Patty, and she's willing to bring forth a bylaw to address the situation. She would probably copy it from another municipality in the area. I don't know if I need a notice of motion to have that happen or just have Patty do it.
I'll just turn this to CEO right now.
Thank you, Worship. It's up to you, but I can assure you that Patty's already working on something. So no, I don't think a notice of motion is required. Yeah, she's absolutely working on so.
Thank you, Mr. Barron. So we do have that in the works, Mr. Craven, so that's good. We'll have the discussion at council about that. Anything other business to be brought up? And we don't have any closed session. We'll move to item number 17, the confirmatory bylaw, moved by Councillor Otten, second by Councillor Craven, that a bylaw number 2021-062, being a bylaw to confirm all actions and proceedings of the council of the corporation of the Township of Mapleton, be hereby read a first, second, and third time, signed by the mayor and clerk and sealed with a corporate seal. All those in favor? Thank you very much, everyone. We are now adjourned. Good meeting. Thank you.